In this in this video, I would like to continue what we've been doing in the book of Job. We've been looking at the book, at the grammar, specifically from an inductive approach, doing a grammatical analysis, followed then by commentary. And we worked our way up to Job chapter 21, verse 22. And we'll be picking up at 22. Just to give the background of chapter 21 again, it is interesting. This is Job's second reply to Zophar. In this, I should say, it's his sixth reply as a whole, but his second to Zophar. He repudiates the thesis that the wicked are cut off. That is what Zophar was saying, and judged by God. Job says that there are wicked who live, become old, and wax mighty in power. Verse 7. Their houses are safe, and they have many healthy children, like a flock of sheep, for example. They spend their days in prosperity. They go peaceably to the grave, and calamity seldom overtakes them. The only explanation of this is the providential dealings of God, which no man is able to penetrate and understand. So we stopped at verse 21, and now I'm picking up verse 22. As Job is continuing to argue his case that the wicked often, or the unrighteous, don't suffer in this life. And so we pick it up at verse 22. Hal el yelamed da'at. Shall to God, shall any teach knowledge? Yelamed is a PL imperfect, third masculine singular from lamad. So is anyone going to teach God knowledge? V'hu ramim yishpot. Seeing he that judges those, he judges those who are high, that is God. V'hu is your pronoun, he, and ramim is a participle from rum. It's a cow participle, masculine plural. So he judges those that are high. Yishpot is from shafat, to judge. It's the cow imperfect, third masculine singular from shafat. So as Job is rebuking his friends for trying to enter in to the realm of God's providential dealings and give black and white answers for their theology, such, Job says, cannot be done. God's providence is really a mystery. God gives prosperity and adversity to whomsoever he wills, and is not responsible to man's wisdom. In other words, man would think otherwise. So we don't understand it, is really what Job is saying. And so to get a parallel to this, one might look at Isaiah chapter 40, verse 13, or Romans chapter 11, verse 34. So Job then continues in verse 23. Zeyamut be'etzem tumo kulo. Sha'anan is the way I'm going to render this. Sha'anan ve'shalev. This one dies, or one dies in full strength, in the strength really of his completeness, or in full strength. Yamut is a cow imperfect, third masculine singular from mot, to die. So this one dies in the strength of his completeness, or in full strength. Kulo, now we have a problem here. Shal anan. Some understand this to be probably a copyist problem here, and should be rendered sha anan, possibly. So, for example, all of him, literally, at ease and quiet. Sha anan meaning quiet. So if one reads that, one would be then not reading the lamed here, but seeing that there was a copyist situation that possibly should be read as Sha'anan. So what Job is saying here is that God can destroy any person in the prime of life and at the zenith of his success. So one dies in full strength, being wholly at ease and quiet. We can't understand. Others will live on who aren't righteous at all and have long life. He continues in verse 24 then, Atinav ma'alu chalav, uma atzmutav yeshu kev. That is, his pails are full of milk. Notice ma'alu is from malah, to be full. It is the cow perfect, third common plural from malah. So his pails or his buckets are full of milk. Umoach atzmotav yeshukach. That is, and the marrow of his bones is watered, or is moistened. Here we have Yeshukah is a pual imperfect, third masculine singular from shaka, having been watered or made to be moist. So what is he saying here? Well, he said other men, on the other hand, the wicked, appear to be well nourished and prospering all throughout life. I think that's what he means when he says his buckets are full of milk and the marrow of his bones is watered, or has been watered. This is a quote, or to go back, I should say, to similar ideas. Proverbs 3:8 and Isaiah 58:11 could be looked at. And so we continue then in verse 25. V'zeh yamut b'nefesh mara v'lo achal b'tova. Where another dies in bitterness of soul, or in the soul of bitterness, and he has not tasted the good. So what is Job saying here? First of all, Yamut, by the way, is a cow imperfect, third masculine singular from mut, to die, or mot, to die. And then in bitterness of soul, another dies and has never tasted, achal, to eat or taste, cow perfect, third masculine singular from achal, has never tasted of goodness. So what he's saying here is other men die who are not wicked, and they may die tragically in bitterness of soul without having tasted any of the good prosperity of the wicked. So what he's doing here, he's critiquing the line of argument that Zophar had set forth, seeking to critique it. So then we go to verse 26. Yachad al afar yishkavu, berima techaseh alehim. Together upon the dust, or in the dust, they lie down, and the worm covers over them. Speaking of death, of both the wicked and the righteous who are cut off early on in life. Together they alike lie. Yishkavu is from shachav, to lie, or to lay down. He's looking at death here, and this is a cow imperfect, a third masculine plural from shachav. So together upon the dust, or in the dust, they lie down, and the worm, rima techaseh alehim, the worm covers over them. Techaseh is a PL imperfect, third feminine singular from kasa, to cover. Notice we have the tav indicative of a third feminine singular prefix, and the vowel pattern, shava pathak, followed by the doubling of the middle radical, indicates a PL stem here, third feminine singular. So what he says, he concludes that both the wicked and the good lie down in the same dust together. Moral criteria are not considered by death, which deals out its fate to both the wicked and the good alike, is Job's argument. And so Job continues then, driving home his critique of Zophar's thesis. Hein yadati makshevotechem u meshimot alai tachmosu. Behold, or lo, I know your thoughts, and the devices, or the thoughts against me that you have treated or wrongly done, or violently treated me with. Here we have yadati, the cow perfect, first common singular from yada. So I know your thoughts and the devices which you, or the thoughts that you have wrongly and violently brought against me. Tachmasu is the cow perfect, second masculine plural from Hamas. So what he's really saying here in verse 27 is the verse is really preparing the way for 28. Job's friends have not explicitly named him, but they have insinuated that he is one of the evil men that they have been talking about. So Job tells them that he is aware of their hurtful thoughts, their harmful thoughts toward him. And so he wants them to know that he's not oblivious to their hurtful thoughts that they have been attacking him with or critiquing him with. So in verse 28, he continues, Ki tamru Aye Beit Nadiv. Ve'aye Ohel Mishkanot Reshaim. For you say, where is the house of the prince? No doubt referring to Job when he was in prosperity. And where is the tent of the dwelling places of the wicked ones? So the thought seems to be, where is this prosperous person now, and those that are wicked? Tomaru is from Amar. It's the cow imperfect, second masculine plural from Amar. For you say, where is the house of the Nadiv? And I'm understanding this to be a reference to Job, the prince here, being prosperous. And where is the tent of the dwelling places of the wicked? Mishkanot Reshaim, of the dwelling places of the wicked ones. So in 28 here, what seems to be being said is that since Job's friends will not accept him as an impartial judge, excuse me, I jumped ahead. Let me go back to 28. He's seeking to refute Zophar's argument in chapter 20, verses 4 and following. Job's friends had indicated that his calamities were the result of a wicked life, as all wicked men end up in disaster and their dwelling is swept away in God's judgment. Job thus quotes their thesis here that the wicked are judged. So, in other words, where then is the house of the prince? And where is the tent or the dwelling places of where the wicked dwell? So he's quoting what they have implied about him. And then he goes on in verse 29 from verse 28. Let me just say one word in 28 again. Job's friends, as we said, had indicated that his calamities were the result of his wicked life, or a wicked life. As all wicked men end up in disaster, and their dwelling is swept away in God's judgment, or their dwelling places. Job thus quotes their thesis, as we said, and this goes back to chapter 8, verses 15 and 22, and 18, verses 15 and 21. Just wanted to drive home the point that Job is making here. So then in verse 29, Halo she'eltem ovrei darik, v'ototam lo tenakeru. Have you not asked the ones who are passing by the way, and their signs or their tokens will you not recognize? Lo tenageru. Here we have she'altim from sha'al, to ask, a cow perfect second masculine plural, and ovre is from avar, to pass, or to go along, to pass through, we could say. It's a cow participle masculine plural from avar, of those that are passing the way, and their signs, or what they have left behind in their writings, in their teaching, their signs, lo tenageru. You do not recognize. From nachar, it's a cow imperfect second masculine plural from nachar. Notice the vowel pattern here in the Shava Pathak, doubling of the middle radical in the Kaf, indicative of a PL stem. And I'm understanding the verb here, nachar, to mean to recognize. So what he's saying here in verse 29, since Job's friends will not accept him as an impartial judge, he begs them to ask the passers-by. See, as a reference point of this, Lamentations 1:12, whether or not they have found these assertions of theirs to really be true. He is sure that their experience will support his claim. Since they do not know Job, their report will not be biased. So talk to the passers-by. Let them inform you, Job is saying, that my thesis is right because you won't believe what I'm saying. So then in verse 30, Ki layom aid ye hasek ra, that the evil man is reserved or spared. The evil man is spared the day of calamity, or for the day of calamity, an evil man is spared. And for the day of wrath, they are led forth, or they have been led forth. Layom avarot yuvalu. Looking at the grammar a minute here, for the evil man is reserved or spared the day of calamity. Ye chasek is from chasak, to spare, and it's a nifal, has been spared from the day of calamity. A nifal imperfect, third masculine singular from chasak. Notice here we had the noon of the nifal having dropped out, yin hasek, and so since the het could not take a doubling with the nifal going into it, what we have is compensatory lengthening, I believe. A hirik under the yod, lengthening to a tseri. For the evil man is spared for the day of calamity. God's going to spare him. And they have been led forth for the day of wrath, to the day of wrath. And here we have Yuvalu is a hofal imperfect, a third person masculine plural from Yaval. Notice that holum, indicative of a hofal stem here, a hofal imperfect. So they have been led forth to the day of wrath, or for the day of wrath. In other words, God's going to lead them forth in deliverance. And so as we look at this verse and ask about its meaning in verse 30, their testimony, that is, the men that have traveled, that Job is saying you should listen to, have gathered from their journeys and confirmed Job's claim. The wicked are prosperous and are spared punishment in the time of calamity and are led away in safety from that punishment. Seems to be what the verse is saying. And so we continue then in verse 31. Mi yagid al panav darko. Who will declare concerning his way to his face? Who will declare his way to his face? V'hu asa mi yeshalem lo. And who is it who will repay him what he has done? So he's asking a question here. Who can declare his way to his face, to this prosperous, possibly kind of a despot. Yagid is a pay noon verb, not God. Notice it's got an AI thematic vowel pattern. So it's a Hifil imperfect, third masculine singular from Nagad. Yangid becoming Yagid, where the noon by progressive assimilation has gone into the Gimel. So who will cause to declare to his face his way? That is the way of the wicked. And who then I think who here should be translated in Hebrew as like who. It's a masculine pronoun, a third person, but it seems to be rendered like who or he, but I think we should render it who has or to repay him. That is, who will repay him for what he has done. Excuse me. The me here is the interrogative. And so who will repay him, who, what he has done? And who is the direct object then of repay? Notice asa is the cow perfect third masculine singular from asa. And yeshalem is the piel imperfect third masculine singular from shalom, to repay. Notice we have the shava patha, doubling of the middle radical in the lamed. So who will repay to him what he has done? Understood here. Now, what is he saying here? I think the text is saying no one dares to rebuke this prosperous, wicked despot or oppressor openly in his life. Who will recompense such a one in judgment? Seems to be the thought. If not in this life, maybe in after this life. But he goes on to say, even that doesn't always work, as he's arguing here. So we move on to verse 32. V'hu kivarot yuval v'al gadish yishkod. That is, he is carried or is brought to the grave, kevarot, and over his mound or over his mausoleum or tomb, one keeps watch. Notice here, Yuval is another hofal, a hofal stem, hofal imperfect, third masculine, a hofal third masculine, meaning to be brought. So he is brought, a hofal imperfect third masculine singular from Yaval. So who he is born in, let's say, like a procession to the grave. And over his gadish is a word that we don't find in the Hebrew Bible that I'm aware of. And it seems to have it means mound. And some have understood this as having a mound in which one is buried. So, who has watched, we could say, he is born to the grave and he is watched over his tomb. Maybe we should render it that way. Yishkod is from shakad, a cow imperfect, third masculine singular, to watch. And so what is said here in 32 is simply when the wicked man finally dies, his grave is placed beside other graves. a large funeral procession comes to the cemetery to see him buried. An impressive monument, then. That's where I understood that phrase here, Gadish, to be like a monument, is erected over his tomb so that others will not forget that this is where he is buried. And again, we're not talking about a righteous person, and many people were just buried without any kind of a tomb. And so he's telling what can happen in critiquing their arguments that the righteous are blessed all through life and even at the end of life. Let me just make a point here. As a Christian minister, we do know that there is a judgment after this life. And even the Hebrew Bible talks about that very clearly, not just the New Testament, but the Hebrew Bible. In Daniel, for example, all who are righteous will be resurrected to life. Those that are not will be resurrected to a judgment of God's judgment. So basically, what he's dealing with, though, is the outward expression of what happens to a wicked person, and often the opposite to a righteous person that you would expect. You would expect the righteous to have the long life and the beautiful ending that he's talking about, or the ending that he's talking about here. Uh, but not so with the wicked, but sometimes it's the opposite. I think that's his point. So then, verse 33, we continue here. The clods of the valley are sweet unto him. Matakulo regve nachal. And all men then draw after him. V'acharav kol adam yim shok. And we could say they were innumerable even before him. Ulefanav ein mispar. And before him there is no numbering. It's numerous. And so as we look at the thought here and also the grammar, mataku is from matak, to be soft. We have a cow, a perfect third common plural in matak. So the clods, rigve nachal, the clods of the valley. We have two nouns in construct. Rigve is the plural for clods. So the clods of the valley basically are sweet. And all men draw after him. Yimshok is from the root to draw, mashak, the cow imperfect third masculine singular from mashak. So all men want to follow that result and draw after him. And before, there is no numbering. They were innumerable before him. And before him, there were still innumerable people that would like to have the same life and same ending, it seems. So as we look at this, what I think the text is saying is simply this: the clods of the valley are sweet to him. People were often buried in valleys, and the death of the wicked closes with here an idyllic touch. Peake well says, quote, the description fitly closes with the idyllic touch of perfect peace in the bosom of the fragrant earth. A life so full of unbroken happiness, lived out to its full measure, rounded off by sleep so sweet and grateful, was bound to attract many imitators who, reversing Balaam's maxim, might say, "Let me die the death of the wicked." So, in other words, again, Job is trying to give answer to what his friends have been arguing, that the righteous have long lives and wonderful things go well, they prosper, whereas the wicked, it's the opposite, have their life cut off. Now, it is true that sometimes the wicked do, but the point is, you can't say always or always the righteous will have an idyllic kind of life. I think this is what the text is saying. And so he's trying to be honest with the argument that the friends have presented. The author of Job must have dealt with this issue and wanted to express it in this beautiful poetic book. It's a work of genius, really, as we try to read it. And then finally, in verse 34, "Va'ek tenachamuni havil." How then do you comfort me in vain? Naham means to comfort. Tenachamuni, it's from it's a PL stem, second masculine plural from Naham. So how do you comfort me? You do it in vain. How then are you comforting me in such a vain way? And then, U teshuvo techem nishar ma'am. And as for your answers that you give, it is left, or it remains, foolishness, or faithlessness, maybe I should say, is left and remains faithless. There's no faith you can put in it. Nishar is a nifal perfect, third masculine singular from sha'ar, to leave. So what he's really saying here in conclusion, the premise upon which Job's friends have based their argument is really, he's saying, refuted by the basic facts of life. Job implies that his friends have evil designs then behind their argument, and they're not giving a true answer to why he, as a righteous person, is suffering. And I think one of the things we learn from the book is there's absolutely at times no answers as to why things happen in this world. And that's going to be at the end of Job, where God rebukes Job and his friends for trying to figure out God's providential dealings that no human can fully understand. One thing we do know, and I'm saying this as a Christian minister, that we know that the Lord promises to be with us even to the end of the age. And I'm reminded of Matthew 28. I'm reminded of the book of Romans, the great book of Romans, chapter 8, where if we have our faith rooted in Christ, that nothing can ever sever us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. So, but in terms of God's providential dealings, it's wrong to try to give easy answers, which is what Job's friends were trying to do.